My name is Michael. I'm 33 years old and not long ago I experienced one of life's toughest realizations. Being married to someone who views you primarily as a source of income with little else to offer quickly leads to a life of misery. Let me take you back to a time I thought was filled with happiness, or at least what I believed was happiness. When I first met Ashley, she was like a spark, full of enthusiasm, laughter, and just the right level of unpredictability to make life exciting. We couldn't seem to keep our hands off each other. Every look, every touch was electric. But here's the catch: marriage, as it turns out, is apparently the enemy of passion. Fast forward 4 years into what I thought was a happy marriage, or perhaps a better description would be a marriage that had become dreadfully dull. One day, after hearing the same excuse for what felt like the 100th time, "Not tonight, I'm tired," I decided to address it. It was a mistake. She looked at me with the calmness of a kindergarten teacher explaining why you shouldn't eat glue and said, "I don't owe you anything in the bedroom." I was stunned. "You've got to be kidding, right?" I asked. She shook her head, her tone dripping with certainty. "No, I'm your wife, not your object." Her tone was so self-assured that it felt as if she had just discovered the secret to world peace. Meanwhile, I sat there, completely dumbfounded, wondering how we had reached this point. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not some caveman who demands intimacy on a rigid schedule. But when your wife flat out tells you that physical affection is completely off the table, you start to question if you're actually living with a very expensive roommate. I tried to reason with her. "Ash, this isn't just about intimacy. It's about connection, closeness, about us." She let out a heavy sigh, as if I had just asked her to solve an advanced math equation. "Michael, we're fine. Stop overthinking everything." Spoiler alert, we were not fine. Over the next few months, I tried everything I could think of. Date nights, cooking dinner, even folding laundry, a task I despised with all my heart. Each time, she'd thank me with a quick peck on the cheek as if I were just some overly helpful colleague. One night, I suggested therapy. Maybe a counselor could help us work through everything. Her response? A sharp laugh. "Michael, therapy isn't going to make me want you more." Ouch. That one really stung. But, true to my nature, I wasn't ready to give up. So, I booked a session anyway, hoping she might change her mind. She didn't. Instead, she rolled her eyes and said, "Why can't you just accept that this is who I am now? Marriage isn't just about sex, you know." That was when the realization hit me. Ashley wasn't going to change, and honestly, maybe I shouldn't have to beg my own wife to care. After that conversation, something inside me shifted. It was as if a switch had flipped, and I realized I was done pleading. Who would want to feel like a salesperson trying to convince their own spouse to be intimate? No thanks. I decided it was time to focus on myself for a change. I began going to the gym more often, spending time with friends, and even picked up an old hobby, woodworking. But as the months passed, Ashley's indifference began to feel like a glaring neon sign flashing, "You're the problem." I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if she really just didn't care anymore. Then came the unexpected twist. One day, out of nowhere, Ashley entered the living room wearing a smile so bright it could light up Times Square. She sat down as if preparing to pitch me a business deal and said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should start trying for kids." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Kids? Are you serious?" I asked in disbelief. "Yes, Michael," she said. "We're not getting any younger and it's the next logical step." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around her words. "Ashley, we've had sex twice this year." "Twice? You honestly think this is the right time to have a baby?" Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Well, maybe that's something we can work on." Oh, now she wanted to work on it? How convenient. I could feel my blood pressure rising, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I walked out of the room before I said something I might regret. That night, lying in bed, I thought about what she had said. Kids weren't just some next step in life. They were a lifelong commitment. The idea of raising a child in a marriage where one partner had already checked out wasn't just sad, it was downright terrifying. The next morning, I called a lawyer. By the end of the week, I had divorce papers ready to go. I wasn't playing games anymore. On Monday, I handed them to her. "What the hell is this?" she asked, holding the papers as if they were some dangerous object. "It's a divorce petition," I said flatly. "I've thought about this long and hard, and I believe it's the best thing for both of us." She blinked, completely caught off guard. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I replied. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ashley had no sharp comeback. Instead, she sat there, staring at the papers in stunned silence. Over the following days, Ashley went from shock to outright hysteria. There were tears, arguments, and a few guilt trips. "I thought you loved me," she said at one point, her voice trembling. "I do love you," I answered. I was determined to leave. I had started packing up my things, feeling it was the only way forward. But then Ashley's true nature revealed itself. One evening, as I was sorting through my books, she walked in wearing lingerie I had never seen before. And I'm not talking about anything ordinary, it was the kind that you'd expect to see on a Victoria's Secret runway. She even had props. Yes, props. Leaning against the doorframe, she purred, "Michael, maybe we could give this another shot." I won't lie, I hesitated for a moment. For just a second, I considered that maybe this time she was serious. Maybe she had finally realized what she was about to lose. But then reality hit me hard. Where had all this effort been for the past 2 years? And why, of all times, did it take divorce papers for her to start caring? I shook my head and said, "Sorry, Ashley," as I walked past her. "You're a little late." Her jaw dropped in disbelief. "You're really going to throw all of this away?" "No," I replied, turning to face her. "You already did." After that night, Ashley didn't give up. She tried everything, first with the lingerie, then with emotional pleas, and, of course, my personal favorite, guilt trips. One morning, as I was finishing packing my last bag, she sobbed, "You're abandoning me, Michael. I gave you the best years of my life." I zipped up my duffel bag and met her eyes, unwavering. "Ashley, you gave me just enough to keep me around. Let's not pretend otherwise." Her tears stopped instantly and her face hardened. "Fine, leave. You'll regret this." Ah, the classic line. "You'll never find anyone better than me." I shrugged, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out. For once, I didn't look back. The first few nights, I stayed at a hotel. It wasn't ideal, but I needed the space. I changed all my passwords, went through our joint accounts, and made sure Ashley wouldn't be able to access anything that wasn't hers. My lawyer had been clear: keep things clean, fair, but most importantly smart. A few days later, my sister called. "Come stay with me," she said. "There's plenty of room, and honestly, it'll be good for you to be around family." By the weekend, I was back in my hometown, staying at her place while I figured out what came next. It felt surreal to leave behind the house we had shared and the life we had built together. But of course, Ashley wasn't done. Not even close. Her attempts to reach me began with texts. "I miss you. Can we talk? I know I messed up. Please, just give me one more chance. This isn't who we are, Michael." I ignored them. My lawyer had advised me to limit all communication, and honestly, I didn't want to get dragged back into her manipulation. But then came the voicemails. "Michael, please, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just come home." Home. I thought. That house hadn't felt like home for years. A week later, her attempts reached a new low. My sister and I were sitting in the living room catching up when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from Ashley. Hesitant, I opened it and almost dropped the phone in shock. It was her, wearing even more lingerie, holding a bottle of champagne, with a caption that read, "Let's celebrate a fresh start." My sister glanced at the screen and burst out laughing. "Wow, she's really trying everything, huh?" I muttered, deleting the photo. She's nothing if not persistent. By the end of the month, I had moved into my own apartment, a small place with just enough room for me and my thoughts. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I focused on my work, reconnected with old friends, and slowly, I started rediscovering who I was outside of that marriage. One night, as I was scrolling through social media, I saw a post from Ashley. She was out with friends, smiling as if nothing had happened. The caption read, "Here's to new chapters." I couldn't help but laugh. For someone who had claimed she couldn't live without me, she certainly seemed fine. But then again, pretending had always been Ashley's specialty. Things weren't perfect, of course. There were days I felt lonely, nights when I doubted my decision, and moments when I wondered if I'd ever find someone who truly understood me. But as time went on, those feelings faded, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was living for me. The divorce process itself went surprisingly smoothly. It wasn't without its challenges: lawyers, paperwork, and the awkward meetings where Ashley tried to play the victim. It was exhausting, but in the end, we kept it civil. As for the house, she wanted to keep it, and honestly, I didn't care. That place held too many memories I was ready to leave behind. We came to an agreement: she would pay me half of the house's value over the next 5 years. My lawyer made sure the terms were clear and solid. The last paragraph rephrased. The divorce was a tiring process, but we managed to keep it civil. She wanted to keep the house, which didn't matter much to me anymore. I was ready to move on from the memories tied to it. The deal was simple: she would pay me half of its value over 5 years, and my lawyer ensured that everything was firmly in place. No late payments, no excuses, I told her firmly. Ashley tried to argue, but I wasn't changing my mind. As for everything else, bank accounts, furniture, it was split evenly. No drama. I walked away feeling lighter, like 100-pound weight had been lifted off my shoulders without me even realizing I was carrying it. About 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I was settling into my new routine. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my old friend Jake. Jake and I had been close for years, and although he wasn't the type to gossip, this time he just couldn't resist. "You won't believe who Ashley's dating now," he said, barely able to hold back his laughter. I sighed. "Do I even want to know?" "Oh, trust me, you do. This guy, he's something." The something turned out to be a guy named Trevor. I quickly checked social media and found Ashley's latest post. The two of them were standing together outside her house, grinning from ear to ear. Trevor was wearing a tank top with the words "Hustle Hard" across the front, and his arm tattoos looked like they'd been scribbled by a bored middle schooler. I couldn't help but laugh out loud, alone in my apartment. Later that week, Jake filled me in with more details. Apparently, Trevor was one of those so-called serial entrepreneurs. Translation: he sold cheap energy drinks from his car and claimed to be an influencer even though he only had 512 followers. He'd been married twice and had a reputation for bouncing from one girlfriend's couch to the next. "He's living with her now," Jake added. "Guess he doesn't have his own place." Classic. At first, I thought I might feel some jealousy or bitterness about it, but surprisingly, all I felt was relief. If Trevor was Ashley's idea of an upgrade, then I definitely dodged a bullet. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to realize she'd swapped stability for, well, whatever Trevor had to offer. But that wasn't my problem anymore. After the emotional roller coaster of the divorce and the absurdity of finding out about Trevor, I decided I needed a break. Not just from unpacking or work, but from everything. A night to myself, to relax, enjoy my own company, and maybe, just maybe, meet some normal people for a change. That's how I ended up at a small craft beer bar downtown. The atmosphere was buzzing with energy, but it wasn't too packed. Just the perfect vibe. The wall behind the bar was lined with taps, each one labeled with names like Hippocalypse and Pineapple Express IPA. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a flight of the most intriguing beers, and let out a deep breath, feeling the tension slip away for the first time in months. I was halfway through a rich chocolate stout when she walked in. She had short auburn hair, an easygoing smile, and wore a leather jacket that practically screamed, "I'm cooler than you, but I won't rub it in." She slid onto the stool next to me, glanced at my flight, and smirked. "Trying to drink the whole menu," she teased. I laughed. "Just narrowing down my favorites. Got any recommendations?" She grinned. "Depends. Are you a hops guy or a hide the alcohol with fruit guy? I'd like to think I'm versatile." That made her laugh. "All right, try the mango saison, trust me." Her name was Samantha, but she insisted on going by Sam. We spent the next hour talking about everything under the sun, from beer and travel to the strange phenomenon of people who put pineapple on pizza. She was firmly anti-pineapple while I was more neutral on the subject. She had this light, confident energy about her, but in a way that wasn't overpowering. It was refreshing after all the emotional back and forth with Ashley. When the bartender came by to announce last call, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. "Listen," I said, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt, "this has been a lot of fun. Would you be up for dinner sometime?" "My treat." She smiled. "Bold move asking me out while I'm half a beer ahead of you, but yeah, I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I walked out of that bar with a real smile on my face. A few days later, Sam and I met up at a cozy Italian restaurant. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, we shared stories about everything from her work in graphic design to my new hobby of woodworking, and even the time she accidentally adopted a ferret. Long story, but hilarious. Eventually, the conversation naturally turned to relationships. "So," she said, swirling her wine, "what's your story? Any crazy exes?" I chuckled. "You have no idea." I gave her the condensed version, married young, things fell apart, and now I was figuring life out again. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. "What about her?" Sam asked. "What's she like?" "Oh, you'll love this," I said, pulling out my phone. I scrolled through the photos until I found one of Ashley and Trevor standing outside her house, then handed the phone to Sam. "That's her in her new whatever he is." She replaced me pretty quickly. Sam stared at the photo wide-eyed, then surprised me by bursting into laughter. It was short, sharp, and seemed to carry some sort of emotion I couldn't quite place. "Wait a second," she said, handing the phone back to me. "I know this guy." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You do?" I asked. "Yeah," she responded, leaning back in her chair. "Trevor used to hang out with some of my friends. He's a total mooch. But here's the kicker, I've seen him with your ex before. A while back." I froze. What do you mean, a while back? She lowered her voice, then continued, I saw them together at a party. They were holding hands. This was long before you even mentioned your divorce had started. For a moment I was speechless. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, connecting dots I hadn't even realized existed. If what Sam was saying was true and I had no reason to doubt her, then Ashley and Trevor hadn't just gotten together after the divorce. They'd been seeing each other while we were still married. I must have looked stunned because Sam reached across the table and gently touched my hand. Hey, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I said slowly, just processing. She smiled sympathetically. For what it's worth, you're better off. Trevor's the type of guy who'll drain her dry and then move on to the next person. That made me smirk. Good to know. We finished dinner, and when we parted ways, she gave me a hug and said, don't let this drag you down. There are better things ahead for you. Sitting on my couch later that night, I stared out the window at the quiet city skyline. It had been weeks since that dinner with Sam, and while things seemed to be improving, my mind would still wander back to Ashley from time to time. Not out of regret or longing, but out of a need to understand what went wrong. I found myself replaying moments in my mind, focusing on little things that hadn't seemed important at the time but now felt painfully obvious. The late nights she claimed were work events, the sudden increase in her gym sessions when she'd never cared about fitness before, how she guarded her phone like it held some big secret, and of course, her complete lack of interest in me. At first, I had blamed myself. I thought maybe I wasn't exciting enough or successful enough or attentive enough. But then something clicked. It wasn't me. It was never me. After what Samantha said about Trevor, it all started to make sense. If Ashley had been seeing him for months before the divorce, then who's to say he was the first? Everything started to connect in a way that made my stomach twist. Her sudden withdrawal from intimacy, her emotional distance. It wasn't just because she had lost interest. It was because she'd likely found someone else, maybe even more than one someone else. And the part that stung the most? She had let me sit there, blaming myself, trying to fix a marriage she'd probably checked out of long before I ever realized it. But as that thought settled, something unexpected happened. I felt relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. Ashley's decisions weren't a reflection of my worth or my efforts. They were a reflection of her selfishness, her inability to communicate, her need to seek validation from other people. I had spent so much time wondering what I did wrong, when the truth was clear, I wasn't the problem. And now? Now she was Trevor's problem. I couldn't help but chuckle softly at the thought. Good luck to her, I muttered. Something told me she would need it. As for me, life felt lighter. Samantha and I had been seeing each other more often, and every time I was with her, I felt this spark, something I hadn't experienced in years. She was kind, funny, and completely upfront about who she was. No games, no guessing what the other person was thinking. Conversations with her felt natural, like catching up with an old friend while also discovering something new. Sure, it was still early, and I wasn't rushing into anything, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the possibility of something real. Something that didn't require begging or jumping through hoops just to feel appreciated. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.